What's going on, my horror thriller fans? Thank you for joining us on Cinema Recap. Always happy to have you here. And today we're going to touch upon Get In, a 2019 French horror movie. And disclaimer, this movie was pretty rough. We have animals being killed, people beaten up and killed, got strong implications of rape. It's pretty disturbing. I warned you. Spoilers ahead. We see a beautiful lake. A van pulls up. Family gets out. An excited kid runs towards the water carrying a blow-up sea mammal. The boy and dad skip stones on the water while the mother lies on the sand reading a book. She looks up, watching the dad and son play together. They spend hours there, and then return to their van when it begins to get dark. August 30th. They're all in a van now and driving away. It's fully dark. There's thunder and heavy rain outside. Chloe, the mom, tries to call someone called Sabrina, only to hear a voice message. Paul, the dad, suggests that maybe her battery's dead, and Chloe should call Eric instead, but she doesn't have his number. They pull up at a big gate, the gate to their house. Paul tries to open it with a remote, but it fails. Chloe tries to call home, but they get a voice message instead, saying that Eric and Sabrina can't come to the phone. Chloe leaves a message saying the remote they have won't open the gate, and they can't get a hold of them, and to call back as soon as possible. A police car arrives, sirens blaring, asking Chloe if she called them. She says they didn't, but they can't get into their house. The cop then sees Paul with his hood up against the rain. They get the wrong idea and order him to the ground with guns raised. Now we have confusion about who owns the house as they argue in the rain. The name on the mailbox has been changed. Chloe's trying to defend her husband, complaining about the way he's being treated because of his color. The family are then taken to the police station. Police officers are not listening or believing them. Chloe complains that they used excess force, and the officer, explains there was a break-in. He goes on to say that the Bolsos, Sabrina and Eric, explain that they rented the house from them. Paul explains they were house-sitting, and Chloe says that Sabrina has been their son's childminder for 2 years, that they were evicted, and Chloe and her family were going away for 2 months and that the Bolsos were allowed to stay for that time. But now Eric and Sabrina are refusing to leave. The police officer asks them if they signed a document. Paul looks at it and explains that he asked them to pay the utility bills while they were away. This causes problems on the legal side. The cop explains that he can't evict them and that the paperwork says the house is theirs, the Bolsos' house. The cop says they're going to need a court order to evict them, and if they try to force their way in, they're looking at a 3-year prison sentence. They leave, the parents upset. Now they're back in their van. They attempt to go home and talk to him, so they drive back and see Sabrina outside the gates bringing the bins back in. She rushes back onto the property, the gates closing behind her. They try to talk. The encounter is short and unproductive. Sabrina refuses to answer questions and threatens to call the police. Eric's the same. Both are hostile, telling Paul and Chloe that they will not leave the home, telling him to go away. Now the family goes to find a place to stay in the meantime, a campsite. Chloe meets an old friend called Mickey. She introduces her husband to him, and Mickey says that he and Chloe went to school together. Mickey's asking Paul if they're on vacation. Paul replies not exactly. He doesn't want to explain anymore, but drives away. They find a lot to park their van in. Later, Paul's on the phone, talking about paperwork and bills and trying to sort out this problem, but the lady on the phone is unable to help, saying Eric and Sabrina have paid the bills and are the perfect tenants. Chloe comforts him, but Paul is angry and tense. Later on, they talk to another person and have filed an interim possessions order to try to get their house back, but this'll take 5 days. The woman tells them that they can't lose the order because they, Eric and Sabrina, have no right to be there. Chloe asks about the paperwork signed by the police, and the woman explains that it means Eric and Sabrina cannot be evicted on the spot, assuring them that they will get their home back soon. September 5th. The family's still at the campsite. It's morning. Paul and Chloe get ready for work, while their son gets ready for school. Paul's a teacher, educating his class about slavery in America, liberty, the law, and people's rights. He gets into an argument with a student, a troublemaker named Kevin, who says that if a robber steals from you, you deserve it because you're weak. If you're stronger, then you can just get your money back. That's the gist of it anyways. Paul gets angry and tells Kevin to leave the classroom. Kevin argues back, throwing some racial slurs at him, calling him an Oreo, white on the inside. Kevin leaves and Paul sits down, now breathing heavily with anger. He tries to continue with the lesson, telling the students to turn the page in their books. Now when Paul returns home after work, he's thrown a surprise birthday party, and his friends and family stream out of the van. with cake and sparklers. Later, when it gets dark and the children play, Paul talks with some friends about this crazy situation they're in. Paul seeing the positive side, saying that it's like an extended vacation and that their son Louis is having a good time. Chloe talks about her new job, and Paul soon joins her, and they talk about their vacation and how great it was. Chloe gets up and dances with a friend as she hears a song she loves. Paul says goodbye to some other friends who leave for the night before looking back to watch Chloe dance. When they're alone, Paul apologizes to Chloe for not meeting her at the shrink, as they call it, a marriage counselor, we soon learn. Chloe says she doesn't want them to split up. Paul says that he doesn't want it either, and that he'll go next time, but things are kind of difficult now. September 15th. Paul and Chloe still don't have their house back. They're told the signed agreement is open to interpretation. You see, a case can still be made, but since Eric and Sabrina are maintaining that property, it makes it really difficult for Paul and Chloe from a legal perspective. Paul's understandably furious, and the couple are given no solid answers, only told that they'll definitely get their home back eventually. Well, Paul's losing patience. He goes from person to person, office to office, legal stuff and paperwork, and still can't get his house back. Paul returns to the campsite. It's dark now, and he and Mickey sit to talk and have a drink. Paul's explaining that he's a history teacher, and Mickey's asking what the worst year for humans was. Mickey explains that it was probably a day when humans nearly faced extinction due to a volcanic eruption. Only 10,000 people survived. He explains that they all descended from these 10,000 people, and that he, Paul, and Mickey are very distantly related because of it. Mickey then asks if people are happier nowadays, believing that they're not. He encourages Paul to share his troubles, asking about his wife and their strained relationship, and also of why they're here in the first place, and the situation with their house. Paul explains. Mickey then goes on to say that Paul chooses to be a victim. Irritated by this, Paul leaves. October 2nd. Wow, still no house. Paul and Chloe are back in the office and given a date, November. You see, Eric and Sabrina can't be evicted without being given a home by the council, so they're waiting for a council home to be available. Paul storms out furious, saying later in the car how stupid the woman is, continuing to rant, saying that he's paying rent for squatters to stay in their house. Now at school, Paul does nothing to break up a fight between two boys, one of which is black and the other white. He takes his frustrations out later by jogging. When Paul gets back to the caravan park, Mickey invites him out. Paul gets into the back of the vehicle and Mickey apologizes about his gun being in the back, telling him to be careful. Mickey's friend introduces him to Paul and takes a selfie of the three of them. Paul goes out with the men clubbing, ignoring the calls from his wife. He drinks a bit, is also hit on by a girl as another guy encourages him to use violence against the squatters, mentioning guns. Now Paul and some of the other guys hang out in an abandoned building and shoot pigs in the dark. The place belonged to Mickey's father, who let it go to ruins and become overrun. Mickey says the pigs need to be shot and that the problem won't sort itself out, strongly hinting that he should do the same to the squatters. Paul takes the gun Mickey has and shoots the dying pig they found, quickly ending it. Paul stays out all night and returns to his family the next morning. They head straight back for their house, with Paul driving. He drives right through the wooden fence and stops the van. Paul then talks to his wife, telling her that a student called him an Oreo, and explaining what it means. Paul says the student was right. Chloe's asking what he's talking about. He doesn't answer. Paul now wants to fight for his house back and is tired of the paperwork. Now Paul and Chloe get out the van. Paul stands a distance from Eric, who's telling him to leave, telling him he's the legal owner of the house. Their son Louis runs into the house and Paul and Chloe try to go after him, but Paul is stopped by Eric. Louis comes back outside with a game and returns to the van with Chloe. Paul's asking for his pet bird he sees through the window. Eric refuses. Paul and Chloe get back in the van but remain on the property. That night, they sit side by side on the roof of their van, staring at the home. Chloe tells Paul to ease up, and they can't change anything, so he's got to accept it. She says the family is what matters the most. Paul, however, refuses to leave. The next morning, Chloe's speaking to Mickey, telling him to leave her husband alone and not put ideas in his head. Mickey's playing stupid, asking Chloe if she told Paul about their past. Things almost turn physical, but she kicks him in the nuts and leaves, staying loyal to her husband. October 25th. Paul goes for a jog, meeting up with Mickey in a hot tub for drinks, and Mickey continues to fill Paul's mind with radical ideas. Paul's continuing to try the legal route, but so far, this ain't solving the problem. October 31st. Paul's dragged out of the van, which is still parked on the property. Eric walks him through the house to the front gate, which has been vandalized. Eric demands if Paul's friends did this. Paul replies that everyone knows what Eric's done and that everyone hates him. Eric tells the people to come, shouting in his face, saying that he's not afraid. Paul says he'll not stop. Sabrina, standing behind him, who's currently pregnant, begins to throw up, and Eric goes over to help her. Paul walks away. He meets a friend in the backyard and tells him he's going too far. They argue a bit, and Chloe says that she and Louis are leaving to stay elsewhere. The two begin to argue, and Chloe says she wants to leave, saying she doesn't want the house. Paul accuses her of running away, saying it's something he should have done when she cheated on him. Chloe storms out. Paul shouts after her that he'll settle this problem tonight. Paul goes out that night and meets with Mickey at the club, where Paul gets high, cheats, and drinks. Once outside, he sees an injured man with Mickey and his men beating him up. Paul tries to stop him, but Mickey tells him that everything's all right. Mickey finds Paul walking home later, offering him a ride. Paul refuses. Mickey gets out the car, beginning to mock Paul about how he's been domesticated, how he needs to take his house back by force, and how his wife slept with Mickey in the past. He punches Paul, saying that they could have had a good friendship, before getting back in the vehicle and driving away. Paul starts to jog, still feeling the effects of the drug. He begins to scream into the night. He then calls his wife, but it goes to voicemail. He says that she can have custody of Louis. They're still having trouble in their relationship, and now Paul is reaching his breaking point. When Chloe sees him, now back at the van, she's asking if Mickey attacked him, seeing the marks on his face. Paul turns away before asking why she didn't tell him about sleeping with Mickey in the past. Chloe replies that it was ages ago, it meant nothing, and that she was just a kid. She says to Paul that he's the only one she wants, and that she wants to grow old with him, that he is the one. She says she loves him. They nearly kiss, but they hear sounds outside. Paul heads outside, beginning to bang on the window of the house, calling for Sabrina and Eric. On the other side of the house by the front gate is a vehicle honking its horn. The vehicle drives right through the gate and people come out shouting and yelling. Paul goes to the front of the house where a fire has been started. People are dancing and wearing pig masks and drinking. Mickey's there, Paul demanding to know what's going on. Mickey replies that he's had Paul's wife. Now he'll take his house because he can't do it himself. Mickey says he's come to even the cosmic score. Chloe and Paul both tell Mickey to leave, but Mickey says he's bored of the campsite, so he'll throw out Eric and Sabrina, and says that the house is now his. Eric, not intimidated at all by what's going on, steps out of the house, asking Mickey if they can talk, before punching him. Mickey headbutts him, beating him further once he's on the ground, before putting the mask on and saying that fear needs to be embraced and savored. Paul, Chloe, and pregnant Sabrina are inside the house now. They're looking outside the windows, Sabrina calling the police. But before the call can connect, Paul takes the phone from her, throws it on the floor, saying he'll handle it. Chloe and Sabrina head upstairs. Paul goes to the window, seeing things burning outside. But there's no people around, only Eric, who lies on the ground motionless. Paul opens the door, going over to see if he's all right. Well, he's still alive. But as Paul looks up, he sees a man upon the roof who throws a Molotov. Paul runs back into the house, leaving Eric behind, locks the door, rushes to the kitchen, grabbing a knife. He and Chloe stand back to back in the entrance hall on high alert. Paul keeps his knife raised, holding Chloe close. The upstairs window smashes. Screaming is heard as Sabrina cries out. Paul goes to make his way upstairs, but the window beside the stairs is broken as a body, Eric's body, is thrown in. Mickey jumps in after him, howling in excitement. Paul and Chloe back away, as upstairs Sabrina can be seen dragged backwards. Chloe's frightened, screaming as a window behind her is smashed. Terrified, Paul and Chloe back away, falling backwards against plastic sheets that were being held up. Mickey and the others begin to beat them violently. Mickey stops the others and they run off, presumably to find Sabrina. Paul and Chloe remain lying where they fell. Mickey looks over him briefly before running off too, continuing to scream and shout. Under the plastic sheet, now bloodied, Paul turns to his wife, who's unresponsive. He pulls the sheet off him slowly. Music's heard in the house, and Mickey is throwing things off the shelves, telling his friends that it's party time. They begin to drink, dance to the music, and smash things. They continue their description as the music plays. One of them kills the bird, and we see Eric inside a giant plastic bag now, presumably dead. He doesn't look like he's breathing. Sabrina's seen screaming, downstairs now. She too is thrown inside a bag, and using a vacuum, that air is sucked out. Paul and Chloe slowly and quietly stand. Paul grabs the weapon as he leads Chloe out. Back in the room, Mickey turns, seeing him gone. Mickey and the group begin to look for him. Paul, who's now ran back to the van, drives through the window. The men still around the vacuum bags flee. Paul Paul reverses, moving away from the house again. Mickey tells one of his other men to deal with him, saying that he'll burn the house down. Paul's now hiding beneath the van, watching the man's legs as he walks around, and he waits for the right moment before stabbing that man in the ankle. The man falls and Paul crawls over to him, stabbing him some more before getting back in the van and making a Molotov. He gets back in the driver's seat as Mickey continues pouring gas around the house. Mickey pauses then, seeing Paul in the driver's seat, his man dead on the floor nearby. Mickey storms over to him, and Paul hides, climbing up the hatch inside the van and onto the roof. Now, Paul locks the van from the outside, using his Molotov to burn the van in its entirety. Mickey manages to break out of the van, now on fire, and he runs into the pool, jumping in. But the pool sets alight also, having had gasoline poured into it. The surface of the pool's ablaze and Mickey approaches the pool watching it burn. As he walks away, Mickey, not extinguished, climbs out of the pool. Paul doesn't see him. Mickey comes up from behind, his mask now melted to his face, and he begins to beat up Paul, getting his bat ready to hit him. But Chloe comes up from behind, hitting him over the back of the head. Mickey turns his attention to her. While Mickey's distracted with Chloe, Paul beats Mickey with the bat. Now Paul stands over him. He reaches forward, pulling the mask off, but is shocked to see his own face. A hallucination. Mickey sits up, grabbing Paul in a hug, tells him that now he has his house back. Mickey then falls back and Paul stands, going over to Chloe, who's crying. The two embrace. They hear calls for help from the inside and both hobble towards the house to open those vacuum bags, saving Eric and Sabrina. But when Paul looks around again, Mickey's gone, and he's nowhere to be found. Well, they have their house back now, and Louis is in his own bed again. Paul tucks him in, telling his son that he loves him. Before heading to his own bedroom, he sits on the bed in shock. And that wrapped it up. That was pretty crazy. Get In, a 2019 French horror thriller. In French, this movie's called Fury, a production released by Netflix. We had Paul played by Adama Nian, Chloe played by Stephanie Kaylard, and Mickey played by Paul Hammy. Thanks for chilling with us on this one, guys. It's pretty rough. As always, till next time. Now check this out. The events of this film are based on a true story. Out of respect for the victims, the names of the people involved have been changed.